Hello and welcome. When I was at high school, I spent 5 happy years as a cadet in the Air Training Corps. These were our formative years when we were all learning new skills, the practical as well as the social. The annual camps at Pierce Air Force Base were eagerly looked forward to. Spending a week roughing it in the bush at Mouchet held no fear, for we could fire weapons, blow things up and take part in bush tricks. My hobby was building balsa wood model aircraft, so being on the parade ground at Pierce, where Vampire jet aircraft warmed up, was both deafening and exciting. So that it was not surprising that when 21, I joined a flying club and became a pilot. My interest in flying has not diminished, and you will always find a book about flying open on my bedside table. One I'm reading at the moment is from the Royal Australian Air Force Heritage Series. It is an award-winning book by Leon Kane Maguire called Lost Without Trace, the story of squadron leader Wilbur Wackett. He was an RAAF cadet too, but from a time and place vastly different from mine. Wilbur's 1939 cadetship was in fact an apprenticeship, as it was until 1941 that the ATC was formed to provide pre-entry training for air and ground crews to the RAAF during World War II. Wilbur had a great aviation pedigree. His father was Lawrence Wackett, a World War I decorated pilot and general manager of the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation when war was declared in 1939. From a young age, Wilbur became fascinated with aircraft and aviation. His uncle, Ellis Wackett, was one of the first officers to join the Royal Australian Air Force at Richmond Air Base in 1926. He had the distinction of performing the first parachute descent from an aircraft in Australia. Ellis was the Chief Engineering Officer of the RAAF during World War II, and that makes the following story so poignant. Cadet Wilbur was called up into full service in September 1939. His pilot training was on antiquated gypsy moths and hawker demons. Over the next 10 months he flew twin-engine Avro Ansons and then Lockheed Hudson bombers. There were many long patrols over the coastal waters protecting shipping and troop convoys. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Wilbur left Victoria for a posting to 24 Squadron in Townsville. There he flew Wirraway aircraft. These were produced by the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation and was all Australia could muster as a stopgap fighter. These and the Wackett trainers didn't pose much of a threat to the Japanese. In January 1942, Rabaul on the island of New Britain offered a deep harbour for the Japanese as a base to attack Port Moresby. These were desperate times for Australia. The RAAF's 24 Squadron Wirraways and their pilots were decimated during the battle for Rabaul. Wilbur sent a plea to his father for something better with which to face the enemy. Can you imagine the anguish of his father when he received that letter? He knew that the Zero fighter could climb to 33,000 feet and had a top speed of 533 kilometres per hour. The Wirraway could only manage 23,000 feet and 350 kilometres per hour. It was like facing a machine gun with a bow and arrow. Yet, Wilbur did survive this mauling of 24 Squadron, and within a few weeks he was posted to No. 75 Squadron, formed during the grim days of March 1942. It was the first RAAF unit in Australia to be equipped with a modern fighter, the Curtiss Kitty Hawk, rushed in from the United States. After only a week's training, the young pilots flew to Port Moresby, New Guinea, to provide much-needed air support against Japanese air raids. Few pilots had a more dramatic introduction to aerial combat. Wilbur became the first Allied pilot to shoot down a Japanese aircraft, and that was within 1 hour of his arrival with the first 4 Kitty Hawks in Port Moresby on the 21st of March. His victory against an enemy bomber, shared by another young untested pilot, Barry Cox, occurred in full view of the hard-pressed garrison, who began cheering. You would, wouldn't you? Within another 24 hours, Wilbur was shot down by an enemy Zero when his squadron mounted an attack on the strategic Japanese airfield at Lae. He remarkably made it to shore after his Kitty Hawk ditched some 10 miles off the east coast of New Guinea. In an epic journey of endurance, he narrowly avoided capture and certain execution. Over the next month, he made his way over the towering Owen Stanley Range and back through 250 miles of jungle and swamps to his unit in Port Moresby. He contracted malaria and was sent back to Australia to recover. Over the next 18 months, he test flew and ferried aircraft around Australia, logging over 1,000 flying hours whilst piloting an extraordinary range of aircraft. His requests to return to fighting were granted in March 1944. Wilbur was posted for training on twin-engine Beaufighters, then posted to 31 Squadron based at Kumali Creek, south of Darwin. Their missions were to harass the enemy with low-level strikes and armed reconnaissance sorties against targets over Timor and adjacent waters, as well as to escort Catalinas on clandestine operations. Wilbur's first mission from Kumali Creek was a clandestine operation to Saroa and Neela Islands on the 23rd of September. Operating in pairs, the squadron Beaufighters gave staged cover for the Catalinas during their period of greatest vulnerability when approaching the Banda Sea. The initial pair of Beaufighters would rendezvous with the Catalina and escort it to the target. A second pair of Beaufighters that had taken off later from Kumali Creek would arrive on the scene after the Catalina had alighted and provide cover for the Catalina's subsequent liftoff and return flight. The Catalina was difficult to escort due to its slow speed, said to be so slow that it was the only aircraft which had bird strikes from the rear. Tired Beaufighter crews returning at night faced poor visibility due to smoke from the end of dry season grass fires endemic to the Northern Territory. That necessitated flight on instruments. Tragically, Wilbur and observer Keith Noble would serve less than 2 months with the squadron before they perished in mysterious circumstances when returning to base from a nighttime operation over the Arafura Sea. The tragedy of this failed mission was that in hindsight it was avoidable. On this mission, Wilbur and Keith Noble's Beaufighter was accompanied by Pilot Officer Ritchie's Beaufighter on the afternoon of the 24th of September. They departed at 15:15 hours, predicting a return to base by 21:30. As the formation of the two Beaufighters headed out over the sea, they left behind towering smoke from coastal grass fires. The flight over the enemy-occupied islands failed to attract Japanese fighter interception, so as the dark blue painted Catalinas entered the safety of the evening darkness, the two Beaufighters turned south, expecting to return to the welcoming flare path at Kumali. Both aircraft had blind flying navigation instruments, but in the black night, when entering the coastal smoke and dust haze hanging thickly in the almost still evening air, their navigation was to a large degree by dead reckoning. Maintaining mandatory radio silence, remaining in formation was difficult. The navigators scanned radio frequencies to guide them to any aerodrome. They couldn't pick up any signal. In the moonless night, with only minimal fuel remaining, the two crews, guided only by magnetic compass and dead reckoning calculation skills, flew on, hoping to sight a flashing airfield beacon. By now, the aircraft were declared overdue as it was past their elapsed time. The Fighter Sector Control Unit had alerted all stations on their landlines and HF wireless network. Searchlights swept the night sky and radar stations searched for any aircraft. At first light next morning, a ground party equipped with four-wheel drive vehicles, HF wireless and supplies for many days departed from Kumali, led by 31 Squadron Engineer Officer Frank Stewart. A bachelor low-flying slow biplanes, led by legendary flying doctor Squadron Leader Clyde Fenton, commenced an aerial search. Ritchie's navigator, Plum Warner, was found near the Brooks Creek sighting. Warner reported that he had been ordered to jump by parachute and during his descent had heard his aircraft crash north of the railway. No trace of Pilot Officer Ritchie has ever been discovered to this day. No trace of Wackett or Noble was found either. It wasn't until October 1945 that stockmen mustering cattle discovered aircraft wreckage in a tributary of the Guparia Creek, some 50 miles northeast of the crash site of Ritchie's plane. They were presumed to have left the aircraft by parachute. In this inhospitable country, it is likely that they died of thirst and were eaten by dingoes. In May 1946, the rotting remains of a parachute and open military-issue survival ration tins were found. The crash site in Kakadu National Park is now marked by a stone cairn surmounted by the late Sir Lawrence Wackett's family coat of arms. As for old animosities, Japan and Australia have now partnered in peaceful cooperation for 8 decades. In November 2020, Prime Minister Morrison signed a military agreement with Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga for a two-way defence treaty. I think Wilbur Wackett would have approved. Thank you for watching.